food is really about safety and belonging more than willpower and discipline.
This is On Nutrition, a podcast from Mayo Clinic, where we dig into the latest nutrition trends and research to help you understand what's health and what's hype. I'm Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This episode, emotional eating. Around 38% of adults say they've overeaten or chosen unhealthy foods in the past month because of stress. So how can we pinpoint the root emotions behind that stress and find healthier ways to cope? Here to help is Ali Shapiro, a health coach in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ali is also the host of the Insatiable podcast, where I showed up to talk about one of my favorite topics, GLP-1s. Now she's here to talk to us about her own experience with emotional eating and how she advises clients to take back control. Hey, Ali.
Oh my God, welcome, Tara. I love when we get together.
Wait, I'm welcoming you. I'm the host.
I know,
but you just said welcome because I say welcome. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you, Tara. I'm so happy to be here.
I know. I love hanging out with you. I love doing podcast episodes with you. This is our jam. It's my favorite.
I know.
So I am so excited to have you on. And I want to hear a little bit more about you getting into your line of work. So you specialize in helping people really heal their relationship with food, which is so cool. What inspired what you do now?
I think most of us who get into nutrition, many of us have our own struggles with food in the past. I was 11 and I asked my parents to take me to Weight Watchers because I had been struggling with my weight. And I know some people are like, your parents let you go, but like my parents, they were teachers. Any idea I had, they were like, sure. So everything was about learning. And so I struggled with my weight. And then 2 years later, I was actually diagnosed with cancer and I lost a ton of weight from chemotherapy. And because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, I think similar to you, right? Yes. It was a period where we really thought thinness equaled health. So in my 13-year-old brain, it was like, oh my God, to stay healthy, I need to stay thin, even though I was thin because I was having a near-death experience, right? But that doesn't compute when the culture is telling you thinness is the key to health. And then I was like, all of a sudden I could fit in clothes. You start getting attention from boys and I was like so excited about that. So I really wanted to hold on to this thinness and equating it with kind of keeping myself cancer free at the time. Mm-hmm. And I could kind of outrun what I would consider emotional eating. Like I would always joke, diet starts tomorrow. But then I went on to college and then I went into my first job with a boss that she and I like really did not get along. And I had never struggled with academics or work before. And I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome and I had been struggling with depression. So long story short, when I was around 26, I found the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which is a holistic nutrition school. Dr. Mark Hyman was one of the teachers and he had introduced functional medicine there. This was 18 years ago before it was pretty big.
Before he had a podcast.
But this was when it was more like fringe. And I had tried everything Western medicine offered, but it just wasn't working for me personally. Everyone's different. But I really connected that a lot of my problems, a lot of my depression, my irritable bowel syndrome, and a lot of the acne were from my gut health, from the chemotherapy and the trauma of that. Yeah. So long story short, it was like this, whoa, food could be medicine. Like I thought it was just calories, right? Like, isn't this only about weight? So that's how I got into it. And then I was really able to get a little bit better at eating, right? Of getting my blood sugar balance, learning about gut health. But then I would find periods when I couldn't keep it up. I had since learned like, okay, sugar tends to feed on cancer. But then when I would go for my scans, from the time I scheduled the appointment to the time I got the results to find out that I was free of cancer, I was like binging on sugar for like a month. And I was like, why am I doing this? And so I was like, maybe if the same way that my irritable bowel syndrome and my depression were symptoms for me, maybe my falling off track is a symptom. And so that's led me to realize that food is really about safety and belonging more than willpower and discipline. So that's how I got here.
And I think your take on emotional eating is just so unique and different than what a lot of like surfacey education that we do. Like you are stressed or you are tired or you are sad. And that's all true. But I think you really dig deep with your clients. So tell me about some of the like common root emotions that you help people with that are behind emotional eating.
There's 4 main triggers. But within each trigger, there are unmet needs, right? I always tell people what you want to think of as tail. What's at the tail end of my food choice, my food noise?
Yeah.
And tail stands for tired, anxious, inadequate, and loneliness. So tired, we'll start there. The trigger is tiredness. It's an emotional state where everything looks worse than it really is, right? But the tired trigger, the need there is rest. And there are a lot of different types of rest. And one of the big things that my clients come to realize is that the tired trigger comes from lack of agency. Right. And so agency is independent choice. It's, oh, I feel like all of this stuff is happening to me and I just have to say yes, or I just have to do it. And there's no shortage of things that want our attention anymore. And if a lot of what's on our plate feels like, oh, I just have to get through that, I just have to get through that, I just have to get through that, that's exhausting, right?
Kelly, I feel like I'm in therapy right now. Like, I needed this so bad.
Oh, did you?
I have a lot of deadlines, literally, that are due 8 days from now. And I'm like, okay, Tara, you got to work on saying no. But if I say no to this opportunity, what if it leads to less opportunities in the future? So I should just say yes. And this is bad timing because I said yes to this one. But oh my God. Okay. Keep going. Keep therapizing me, please.
But let me ask you, how does your energy feel with that pressure looming?
It's exhausting.
Right?
I'm tired.
Yeah, wired but tired in this way, right?
Oh,
right.
I like that.
So what ends up happening is like we have this need for rest. Agency is what I really identified, feeling like, okay, how do I want to approach this instead of I just have to get through the deadline? That's an example of agency. It's like, okay, maybe I need to get up and take a walk and clear my head. And I don't feel like I can do it. It feels unsafe to actually get my needs met. And that's where food comes into the picture.
Okay, so that's the T in the TAIL acronym. So next we have A for anxiety. Break that down for us.
The anxious trigger is when uncertainty is coming from the outside. So we just came out of COVID, right? And we know from the data that like drinking went up, eating went up, a lot of our vices went up. And it was because things were so uncertain. They were unpredictable. Like I had some clients, they had grown up with food insecurity as kids. And then when there wasn't enough food in the grocery stores, it was like, I'm emotionally eating it. So anxiousness is when I think of things outside of our control.
What about the I, inadequacy?
Inadequacy is when it's like the uncertainty is coming from ourselves, the self-doubt. I feel like I'm not enough. How am I going to get this done? Let me go eat and almost eat through while I'm doing it. Like that's your procrastination eating.
Yes.
That's
distraction.
Distraction. That's when you go out and you're trying to lose weight and you feel like you're failing and you say, if I get the pizza, are people going to think I'm not trying hard enough? Or if you're with your healthy friends, you're like, I have to get the salad even though I don't want it, but I have to look like I'm going with the flow here.
These are my salad friends. Yeah.
That's where the inadequacy comes.
Got it. So what about the last trigger, loneliness?
Loneliness, and I think this is really important because we all know loneliness is this epidemic, right? We had the previous Surgeon General focus on this. This is like, what do they say? Like loneliness is the new smoking or
like area of concern.
Yeah. But loneliness, the technical definition is your social needs aren't getting met. So you can be around other people and feel really alone. People in my groups are like, I haven't told anyone else I'm doing this. My husband doesn't know. I've only told one other friend who gets it. And it's like, when we feel like whatever makes us feel really alone in the world, we can't share with other people. And that can be accompanied by shame. It can be accompanied by guilt. And sometimes those things can make us feel really alone. Like I have a lot of clients who come to me after getting sober, right? And so food was either their original issue or became an issue. But now that they don't have the alcohol to make them feel like they belong and part of something, they feel even more isolated, right? Because they're still learning this new way of being in the world. And it can feel very lonely when you're new to that. And drinking has been normalized, even though it's unhealthy. So those are some examples, but those are the 4 triggers.
Tell me more about if there's any kind of biological mechanisms happening here. So you're talking a lot about kind of external, psychological, emotional. Anything internal happening? Higher cortisol is very trendy right now, if that can be a trend. Talking about it, I feel like it's trendy. But what about biologically or physiologically?
I really think of the physiology and psychology as like an infinity loop influencing each other. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I talked about tiredness not being just about sleep, but as someone who struggled for insomnia for 3 years, I can tell you that when we're sleep deprived, our satiation goes down, but everything feels worse. So you have this physical stuff of like, oh my God, I need to eat more. A lot of people who struggle with the tired trigger come with the I deserve this eating, right? Like they're just kind of trying to be productive, trying to go. And it's like, when you're dragging and your satiation isn't what it quite is, you're probably going to eat more, right? Even if it's I deserve this eating, you're probably going to need more to feel satiated because of the lack of sleep. Or if you think of anxiety, right? If your blood sugar is crashing, I have so many clients, again, because we've looked at food mainly through diet culture, I'm feeling a reduction in my anxiety when my blood sugar is balanced. And again, that's your biology working, right? If your blood sugar is crashing, it wants you to be a little bit panicked. So those are some of the physiologic things that I think once they're addressed, they give us even more capacity and strength to tackle the emotional stuff.
Do you see any connection between the types of food that people crave and that root emotion?
Yeah. When you look at the foods that emotional eaters go for, it tends to be sweet carbs, right? Or ice cream, dairy stuff. And when we say comfort foods, we say that like we're beating ourselves up, like I need comfort. We have a primal need to be comforted, to be interdependent with other people.
Let's talk more about food noise, another trendy term, especially in the world of GLP-1s. Kind of those constant intrusive thoughts about food.
Yeah.
You and I talked about this on your podcast. Do you think there's a relationship between food noise and emotional eating?
So I tend to think things are multifactorial. With food noise, and I'm going to borrow some of my clients' language, but they describe it as like urgent. It's not just like, what am I going to eat for dinner? It's like, I cannot wait to get home by myself and go and eat. So it's that urgent, frenetic kind of, and so I think the physical causes of food noise are often your blood sugar is not balanced. Like you're not nourished. You may be eating calories, but you're not getting the proper nutrition. You're not getting enough protein, enough fat, enough carbs. And you talked about this on my podcast. I mean, that's how the GLP-1s work, right? They really help with physical satiation. But for a lot of my clients, it's like, no, I know I'm not hungry. And so this is when food is really about wanting the safety of belonging, to have someone to make us feel mothered, held, and comforted in what's hard for us, right? So to give people like a really concrete understanding of what belonging is, I want to ask you, Tara, when I ask you, think of one of your best food memories, like what pops to mind?
Baking with my grandma is one.
What would you bake? And
Everything. Bread, making pie with my mom, and my mom learned how to make pies from my grandma. It would probably be like making food, likely sweets or carbohydrates, right? This is not like making a salad. Making food with just happens to be female members of my family. I think my grandma's probably why I'm a dietitian.
And so I was going to say, what was your relationship like with your grandma?
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
My daughter has her middle name. Yeah.
Oh, my grandma was like my person. I always said she was like my second mom. And my grandma was super into nutrition, like super progressive about it. But what you're describing is like the food was part of it, but it was, I was with someone who like was lovely. We had such a strong relationship. It influenced my career. That's belonging, right?
Yeah. And like as a child, they gave me autonomy. Like, here, Tara, like you can measure the flour. I probably didn't measure it perfectly well, but like they let me do that. And they taught me like the right way to do it so I didn't mess it up the next time. So not only like the memory of the people and the food, but like the memory of belonging. Like you can make food for our family, even though there's probably going to be shell in that bowl.
Whenever I ask clients that, it's so funny. People will always be like, oh my God, the weirdest memories coming up. It always ends up being a grandparent or someone that they said is like, I felt accepted unconditionally. Dr. Deborah McNamara, who's an amazing developmental psychologist, she talks about how nature designed food to be coupled with belonging. And so I always tell my clients, it's really belonging served with the side of food, right? But food is the thing that brings us to rest, that we can like really feel that belonging. I always say we like know but don't remember that food is just automatically this place of rest, of feeling resourced, of feeling loved. And that's why we turn to it. And Dr. Deborah McNamara has talked about how it actually stimulates attachment chemicals. And she says, nothing is addictive as something that almost works. Food soothes, but does not satiate our deeper belonging needs. And so we get almost that feeling of someone's in it with us, someone's loving us, but we actually need the caretaking, which could be giving ourselves rest. It could be calling a friend or our sister and like really sharing how we're feeling and them not trying to fix it and just being like, yeah, that's hard. It's really hard to not be sleeping for 2 years and be like, oh yeah. Right. Even you being like, oh my God, I have so many
that's
deadlines.
insane to me. Yeah.
So to your question, I just think that's food and attachment and belonging and what belonging really is. And I don't know if do you have any hard food memories?
Oh, like bad memories?
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't prepared for, Ali, I am supposed to be asking the questions.
It's for teaching purposes.
Okay. I have negative memories where I remember what I was eating. So the food has nothing to do with the memory or the negativity. But I know what we had for dinner that night, or like I know what was on my plate at that time.
And I love that you can see that it wasn't about the food. It's like that lack of belonging felt at risk. It wasn't about the food, but it was like, was there tension in the house? Or like some of my clients, they were the person in their family that struggled with their weight. And so it was like, my negative food memories are feeling like all alone and trying to diet or being criticized, or my family was lovely, but I couldn't fit in the clothes that my siblings could, or I was made fun of at school. I had one client, I remember her telling me I would walk home from school and I was always afraid of what my dad was going to say about my grades, even though she tended to be an A student. And so she's like, I would always stop at the mini mart on the way home. And that was her buffer of like, I'm not going to get the support at home. I even think of my own, I couldn't name this until like 10 years later, but I felt so alone in having cancer as a teenager.
Absolutely,
no one could relate to that. I mean, I was one of the only people that I remember in my grade struggling with their weight. So we look at the hard food memories and that absence of safety, that absence of feeling like we could turn to someone or find support is there. So once you see this, you can't unsee it, but you just need someone to name it.
When you're not hungry, but still feel the urge to reach for food, think about the T.A.I.L emotional triggers, feeling either tired, anxious, inadequate, or lonely. Tiredness comes from overwhelm, a lack of agency, and a lack of rest. Feeling anxious may come from uncertainty about factors outside of our control. Inadequacy is uncertainty about ourselves, usually marked by eating for procrastination. And loneliness is when your social needs aren't getting met. And sure, some of these triggers could be physiologically linked. For instance, you may feel anxious because your blood sugar is low, and so you reach for food. But we could also be reaching for carbs and dairy products when we feel the need for comfort and belonging of our fondest food memories, like baking with a loved one. Or we're turning to food for the comfort we aren't getting from the people around us. So let's dig into that need for comfort and the harmful strategies we may use to find it. You name different patterns of comfort eating. There's those that compete, avoid, or accommodate. Do you want to explain those?
People often think they know their triggers. They'll say it's stress eating. Okay, well, what specifically is stressing you out? So what ends up happening, we'll take your exhaustion example. I'm feeling tired. And then I learn I need some form of rest, whether it's like what deadlines are movable. Maybe I have to ask my husband, I need some time to myself. Can you take the kiddos? Whatever it is. But then we don't do that. My clients are like, I hate the fact that this involves having needs, right? Like,
I know. I don't have needs. I'm Superwoman. I don't need anything.
Yes. In fact, people who do are needy, not human. They're needy, right? They're high maintenance. They're a burden, right? And this is what we're afraid. So what these types of eatings are protection strategies, right? And like, again, for everyone listening, all of this makes sense. Why we fall off track makes sense. Why we use these strategies makes sense. We've earned them. So those that use the compete strategy, they tend to be the eaters who are just like, I'm just eating to get through this. Like I had a client who's like, I don't get it. Like at the end of every night, it's like me, my husband, and my son, and we're all just chilling. But then I just get these bowls of cereal and I just want to get through it. And that's how they approach their work. That's how they approach life when things are hard. I just want to get through it. And we're kind of always thinking like related to food or weight loss or healing. It's like, okay, I'm ahead by 400 calories. I'm ahead or behind. I got to do more. I got to do more. And so the eating, right? How we eat is like, it's just a mirror of how we're living our lives. And that's because we've been rewarded for being accomplished. So the eating a lot of times is giving the energy to keep going, but it's also just like, how can you slow down when your whole life is like on 90 miles an hour?
Okay, so that's the compete strategy. What about the avoid strategy?
Avoid tends to be when we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to look high maintenance, and where we're really stuck in perfectionism. So this is why when we are in this avoid mode, it's like, I have work to do, but first I'm going to get something because my expectations for myself are so high. Or
Productive procrastination. Have you heard this?
Yes.
Okay, that's me.
Productive procrastination.
I'm going to reorganize my sock drawer.
Yes, exactly.
I don't have to do the work thing I'm afraid of, but I'm going to feel good because I just reorganized my sock drawer. God, I wasn't scrolling. I was reorganizing my sock drawer. Look at me.
Or some of my clients have tried intuitive eating and found it really hard because of the emotional component or because processed foods. But they'll be like, I try to check in and it's just messy. Not only with, oh, I fell off track, everything's ruined, rather than being like, what worked here? What do I need to learn? What do I need to improve upon? It's all so messy. I'm just going to avoid that. So we do that with our eating. We do that with exercise. Like it doesn't count if I'm not sweaty and burning over 500 calories. A walk doesn't count. Oh, it does. It does.
It doesn't count if you're not wearing your Apple Watch.
Yeah. We need an upgraded, like if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? It's like the Apple Watch doesn't tell you it happened. So that's the avoid eating protection pattern, right? But again, you can see how it's about the food. It comes out in the food, but it's also not about the food, right? Like people are like, oh my God, was there a typo in that email? I need to check it 4 times. I need some safety here. I need some support.
What about the accommodate strategy?
The accommodate strategy is really about kind of people pleasing. So if the compete is more, I think of like hustle culture and avoid is more perfectionism, the accommodate is really about people pleasing. And it could be people pleasing your dietitian. They told me to eat like this and I messed up, but I'm not going to tell them, which they would be lovely to help you through that. But again, I'm afraid of like risking that connection that we have if I disappoint them. This goes back to, am I with my salad friends or am I with my we don't eat healthy friends? Am I with my athletic friends or am I with like, why waste time walking? So it's like, I'm going to accommodate whatever the group is doing. Or like, for example, I had one client, she could not figure out. She did the traditional rules. I'm going to look ahead of time at the menu before I go out with my friends. Would never follow through. And I was like, well, why would it make sense? What is the T.A.I.L trigger? And she realized that there was anxiety there and she felt like she had to keep the conversation going. I'm the one to fix this whole evening and accommodate this idea that it should be a good time and it's all on me. My clients tend to be uber responsible. So it's okay. So this is not really about the food, right? And the awesome thing is once she realized other people would jump in, her food became easy and she stopped drinking a lot too. She said, I didn't realize I was eating and drinking for the same reason.
Yeah.
So the accommodate pattern is where we're just really trying to fix everything, make people really happy. Everyone else avoids discomfort and then we quietly die inside or get resentful. Eventually we notice it, right?
Always.
So those are the 3 strategies that people use to not get their own needs met and then turn to food. And they don't know they're not getting their own needs met or that they even have needs at the time. That's part of the issue.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the opposite because there's always someone who's going to say like, well, that's not me, right?
Yes.
So what about people who essentially do the opposite, right? Like they don't eat based on their emotional state. Do you have clients like that too?
Yes. I don't work with anyone with active eating disorders because you need to stabilize that first. But I have people who have come from anorexic backgrounds, all the things. Remember I was talking about how when we go to the bready foods and like the ice cream, we really want that grounded, that sense of comfort that we get from our favorite caretakers, right? I find when people don't eat, they don't know they want that support. It's almost like I don't trust that any caretaking is going to be there. And I also find that when we want to feel grounded and rooted, it's almost like we do want to feel, we do want to process. When people lose their appetite from stress, it's almost like I don't even want to, I can't even go there to feel. It's too much.
Yeah. So people who are not eating are essentially like using not eating as an avoidance strategy.
Yes, you got it.
We all understand it's hard to express unmet needs, but sometimes the way we turn to food to meet those needs can be a mirror to the way we live our life. For instance, if you find yourself eating quickly when stressed to get it over with, you may be a competitor who tends to hustle in other parts of your life. If you reach for food as a reprieve from your giant to-do list, you may be an avoider who strives for perfection. And if you're eating one way publicly because you're worried about how others may respond, and eating differently when you're alone, you may be an accommodator who tends to do a lot of people-pleasing. On the other hand, not eating may come from a desire to detach and not feel your emotions. So let's dig into the ways we can meet our needs outside of food and support our loved ones who may be in the same boat. So sometimes mindless overeating can truly get physically uncomfortable. Like your stomach expands, you don't feel well, and you know you're physically full, but your brain hasn't allowed you to stop yet. What's happening there?
I think this speaks to the emotional piece, right? Intellectually, I know I'm full. I know I'm not hungry. And emotionally, I'm still starving. And so you can override that. And one thing that I find really fascinating, I'm going to bring in Dr. Deborah McNamara's work again here. She has a wonderful book called Nourished, but she has this chapter on Maslow. And I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like we need our physical needs met. Mm-hmm. And I think belonging is like third up there. But she said in her book, Maslow didn't have the benefit of neuroscience. And we now know that belonging is even more important than getting your primal needs met, because belonging when you're a kid ensures that those primal needs will get met.
Yes.
Belonging is so important. It's what your body is primed for. It's scanning for that all the time.
If you have someone in your life who you believe struggles with emotional eating, how do we support them without crossing the boundary? How do we silently support someone? Maybe that's it, right? Because I would never want to bring up a topic that made someone feel uncomfortable, or maybe they don't even recognize it yet. Do you have any advice?
People who are struggling with food usually know they have a problem, and there's a ton of shame, right?
Yes.
So if anyone were to approach it, even if it's coming from a helpful place, the tone of it is going to be criticism, right? Like if you were to say, so are you struggling? They hear, you're struggling, you're wrong. Like it feels like
watching
that.
You struggle. Yes.
Yes. Oh my God. My worst fears that you were judging me are true.
Yes,
and everyone says, no one's judging you. It's like all that. And so what I think the best thing to do is offer your own experience if you have struggled. Because when you're struggling with food and there's shame, you think you're the only one.
Yeah.
And so if someone else were to say, me too, it just softens it. So I think if you want to support someone, it's offering your own experience in like appropriate context of, oh my God, when I sit here, I just want to eat all of them. So you make it about you, not about them. And then when they feel the opening is right, I think
if they choose. Absolutely. Oh, I love that answer. I love that. And cravings and urges is huge in this emotional eating space, right? Like we've talked food noise, we've talked like just like that. I don't know, like your body is like pulling you towards something. I don't think it's as easy as like, go drink a glass of water. The thoughtfulness in that probably came from a good place. But if someone wants to tell someone who's dealing with a food craving to go drink a glass of water, I have something that I think they should go to.
I know, right?
So are there strategies or specific activities that you have people do to help them pause the reflex of emotional eating? Even if they do end up eating something, how do we build in that mindfulness before the action?
Well, I think when it's super urgent, especially if it's a binge, right? Binging to me, the triggers are much more acute and chronic compared to someone who's just like, I deserve this at the end of the night. And it's like too much chocolate that keeps me up at night, right? They're very different. But I think in the beginning, when it's super urgent, you don't even try to prevent it. You just say, it's going to happen. And then after the fact, the self-care is, why does this make sense? What was the tail trigger? What did I need? And because in the beginning, again, we could call it your nervous system, it's your emotional immune system. It's just too activated. And then you feel like a failure because it's like, if I could take a walk, I would have been doing that, right? And that's like that emotional gap. That's not an intellectual, logical gap. So I think that's really important. When it can go either way, though, that's where you can really bring in this T.A.I.L acronym and say, what do I need instead? And then get that need met. In that situation, it took me a while because I didn't think walking was super helpful. I started to realize it was helpful to bring my cortisol down to sleep, right? So I knew I had to do it for that. But then in those situations where I was like, okay, but that chocolate may wake you up in the middle of the night, and I was really working on my sleep, I was like, just go for the walk, right? And it was like, oh, when I'm doing that, I'm realizing I'm also solving some work problems while I do this. I'm also figuring out how to talk to my son about that question. And so what ends up happening when we do that, when situations can go either way, we end up finding what they call intrinsic motivation for why we want to do that thing. We want to do it. I take walks all the time now. Like I think walking could cure like everything, right? I'm like, oh my God, how was I missing out on this? And it's like, well, I was told walking didn't count to lose weight because you're not sweaty, you're not whatever. But I've found all my own reasons for doing that. And yes, it helps me sleep at night. And I focus on needs because then you can focus on what's accessible. When it could go either way, that's where you start so you can feel success and start to repair that self-trust that so many diets and falling off track. And again, I fell off track for 18 years. So it was like, I don't think this is going to help. I didn't think anything could help. And then you start to prove yourself wrong. So that's my advice.
I like that. And if you walk first and then you eat the cookie, that's okay.
Yes.
Right? Like even engaging in both, but you're going to do the walk first and then you can identify.
I tell people to measure the intensity and duration. So it's not that you didn't do it, but maybe in the past you would have eaten like the whole sleeve of cookies. But this time you were like, oh, doing that wasn't that hard. And I'm picking a walk. There could be so many other things, right? It could be listening to music. It could be, oh my God, I got to text my friend and tell her exactly what's going on. Or if people are falling off track for weeks, is it like now I'm only falling off track for a day, right?
Yes.
And so getting out of that perfectionist mindset is like, this is an improvement process. This is not, I'm good or bad. This is, am I getting better?
Yeah. And to end, I want to hear a success story because I know you have many personal and from your clients, because using food as a coping mechanism or habitually emotional eating, whatever it is, like these can be habits that we have for years.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the longer you do a habit, the harder it is to break.
Yeah.
Do you have any stories about clients who have successfully stopped the cycle of emotional eating that you can share?
Oh my goodness. A client I'm thinking of right now. She grew up in a home where one of her parents had a health issue. And so the other parent had to kind of be a caretaker. And she felt alone a lot in her life. And she was also like hyper responsible. And so sugary cereal, all this stuff was her friend when she needed that sort of support. And when she came to me, she was in her early 50s and she had a lot of health problems. She was on depression medication, high blood pressure, like all kind of the typical stuff. And we just started with like blood sugar and gut health, right? However, as she started doing this, she got off her meds, pretty much all of them after 30 years. I mean, this was like, even I was like, I didn't know that was possible. And through the course of our work, she really worked on that inadequacy trigger. And she had run her own business and she wanted to be done with it. And she was doubting like, but shouldn't I still want to do this? Should I not? And we don't start with big decisions because we don't have the discernment. At first, it was like advocating for, I want to go to this restaurant. So we would start in these smaller situations because she had so much self-doubt. I remember her coming to the group and being like, a bread basket came and I did not care about it. She's like, who am I? You know what I mean?
I always care about a bread basket.
I know. I still want people to enjoy food, but she had ahead of time thought about what she wanted to get out of the evening with her friend. So she led with what she wanted to share. And so the connection and the belonging were there. And she had realized like, oh, portion control is so easy when I really feel at home with the company. So fast forward, she did want to lose weight. So she lost, I think like 50 or 60 pounds, got off all her meds, sold her business, transitioned into something that she exactly wanted to do. So she's fulfilled, right? Like she's fulfilled emotionally. And so the food is super easy.
Wow.
It's repairing self-trust and our own inner knowing. So food can really eat away at it. And I know as someone who struggled with my weight for 18 years.
I am all sorts of goosebumpy right now. Oh my gosh, I can't. I just want to say thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Your clients, Ali, are just so lucky to have you in their lives, the work you do. I just feel like it's so unique and so deep, and the type of knowledge you have related to food is just so different than what I have even. And I'm okay to admit that. It's super cool.
Well, we need all of it though, right? We need all of it. It's not either or.
So thank you for sharing your awesome wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Tara.
There are a few strategies to stop a T.A.I.L trigger in its tracks. You could find an accessible way to meet the need behind your tired, anxious, inadequate, or lonely trigger. You could take a walk or pair your movement with a little sweet treat so you're not totally depriving yourself. And once you're aware of what provokes your emotional eating, you can track the intensity and duration of your response and see how far you've come. If you're struggling with emotional eating, know that you are not alone. It's extremely common to turn to food when your needs aren't being met, or you're overwhelmed or feeling uncertain. So don't beat yourself up if you still reach for a snack when you're stressed. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. That's all for this episode, but if you have a follow-up question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we'll answer it in a future episode. For more On Nutrition episodes and resources, check us out online at mayoclinic.org/onnutrition. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening. And until next time, eat well and be well.